I'm Scott Lucas.
I'm Nevşin Mengü.
And this is World Unfiltered.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a real pleasure, Nevşin. Our viewers might be a bit confused at this point because usually I come in and I ramble on for a bit and then I introduce a guest. But we're doing it a bit different this week. Nevşin Mengü, who for a long time was a reporter, an anchor, was a face on CNN Türk, now reports for a number of outlets, notably Germany's Deutsche Welle. She's coming in to help me out because although I've been a journalist, she's a journalist with a bit of a different insight. We're both in a 21st century in which broadcast media, press media face this internet age. We face the challenges of misinformation, disinformation. We face, rather than several sources, an incredible number of sources. We don't have too little information, we've got too much. But how do we make sure it's reliable? And perhaps more importantly, how free are we to establish its reliability? Given state power, given quite often state pressure on journalists, and worse, is it possible to continue to be reliable, informative, and effective in an increasingly contested world? Nevşin, I'm going to ask you point blank the phrase that I used to grow up with when I was training as a journalist. We speak truth to power. Can journalists in 2021 still speak truth to power?
That's a very good quote, Scott. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's the ideal, right? I mean, we are mediators at the end of the day. Like something happens and we report it to the people, right? That's like, in a simplistic way, that's what we do. What can we do it like that these days? It's a little tough, especially in the country where I live in, like Turkey, Turkish Republic. It has been a little tricky, actually, in a sense, because we can talk about all this, like disinformation, misinformation, and fake news circling in social media. So it's a bit interesting in Turkey's case because usually fake news actually have been circling in conventional media like TV channels and newspapers, and that kind of became the norm. And if you don't comply with this, you're kind of out of the game.
Okay, now you were in the game for a long time.
Yeah.
With CNN, in Turkey. And of course, this is part of CNN's international family of outlets and so on. Let me just start off with the basics though. Why did you want to become a journalist? What motivated you in the first place to get into this?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it was not my ideal to become a journalist or something, to be honest. Most people say like that was my ideal. No, it wasn't. I studied political science and I was like, I wanted to stay in the academia, actually. I wanted to become a political scientist rather. But then after I finished, I was like checking out universities in Canada and this, that. And then I was like, do they still want that? They wanted like thesis proposals back then for MA though. And they are like 100 pages of thesis proposal, this and that. And I was not kind of in the mood right after university for writing like 100 pages of thesis proposal. I thought back then with my young mind, I thought, if I was able to write 100 pages thesis proposal, I would do my master's myself, right? Then that's what I thought back then. So I thought, maybe I should work for a couple of years and, like get some experience about the world and whatnot, and then apply for an MA or PhD, something. So I started working as a journalist, and back then there was a TV channel called Kanal Türk. It was a relatively small TV channel, but it was opposition. So it was the first years of Erdogan's AK Party government. And this was like a little harsh opposition TV channel. So I started working there in the World News Service and night shift and this and that. And then I never went back to academia. I mean, I did my master's later on, but that's it. Basically, I stayed as a journalist.
Okay, so that's where you get the start. And then when did you start with CNN Türk?
Oh, well, I mean, that's actually, do you know what? In Turkey, this is kind of what we do. Maybe it's different in the United States, like you start with a network and you stay there for, long years. But in Turkey, usually we like change jobs between networks because this is the only way to get a real salary raise, to get, transferred as like a reporter or something. So after Kanal Türk, I went to Habertürk, and I covered mainly like Middle East stories back then. There's Gaza war, I covered it, traveled to Kuwait and here and there. Like I was on the field all the time in the Middle East. Then I moved to Iran and started TRT Turk's office in Tehran. That was back in 2009. And then I returned, worked for Hürriyet newspaper for a little bit. And then I started working for CNN Türk. And I anchored 6 o'clock news for about 5-6 years, actually. And then one day, it was right after Mr. Trump was elected, and Mr. Erdogan went to visit Mr. Trump for the first time. And then the meeting happened. I was on live during the meeting, and the meeting lasted only for 23 minutes. Turkey and Erdogan had high hopes about that meeting, so they wanted to show the meeting as like very long, glorious. Trump loved Erdogan at that time. But then on live, I said the meeting only lasted for 23 minutes, and that was it. Mr. Erdogan contacted CNN Türk's Ankara bureau chief and told him to tell my boss to get rid of me and this and that. And then we found a common ground with my boss. So I kind of resigned, and they paid my severance money. That's pretty much it.
So this extraordinary intervention, which takes place in early 2017, it means you get to move on for another job. I mean, did you have that type of, shall we say, state influence, going back several years? Or is this something where the intervention becomes, let's say, a bit more intense after July 2016, which of course is the time of the failed coup?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, when the first Party, got the power, I mean, I'd say like first 3-4 years was pretty good in terms of press freedom. We were like reporting about anything, and there were no restrictions in this, that. It was even better than before. But then I'd say 2007 is like I'd say benchmark. Erdogan started changing in a sense, and he started having more power over institutions and this and that, and some restrictions started coming in. But how it worked is like basically, so it was so subtle. So for example, a guy working for a ministry would come and tell one of the journalists like, well, you're covering these stories, but the Mr. Prime Minister is really upset. If you kind of do this, then we'll not invite you to our press meetings and this, that, that sort of stuff. And then after Gezi in 2013, it was also a very big turning point. So then Erdogan thought, the West was fundamentally against him. That was his first instinct, because he saw the protests and how the media, the international media, covered the protests. So he saw in his mind like it was a trap for him, and they were trying to topple him. And then he started like changing directly, and then we started having massive pressure through state institutions. Also, we have a high board of TV and radio stations called Rütük, right? And then this Rütük started being really harsh. Started giving, how you call it, tickets to TV stations and this and that. Started censoring stuff. It was a turning point, and of course, after the failed coup d'etat, everything became even worse.
In fact, I mean, that's an interesting point to me, that you mentioned the 2013 protest, Gezi Park. You were also in Iran during 2009, which was the mass protest after the disputed presidential election. What were the similarities and the differences working in a journalist in Iran 2009 with its own, let's say, approach to limiting what can be said, and Turkey post 2013?
Yeah, well, back in Iran, I mean, for Iranian media, there are only state channels, right? There's no like foreign enterprise, not like Turkey. So they didn't almost cover the protests, or if they did, they were feeding false stories about protesters and this and that. They were pointing out some foreign mercenaries and this and that. But in 2013, we still had, like a flourishing, semi-free media environment. So, for example, Halk TV was covering the protests all the time. They started a small TV channel called Chapul TV, and they were covering the protests and this and that. And CNN was not bad either. You know, CNN Türk, we covered the protests somewhat. So, I mean, there was a relatively, you know, much more, you know, freer press environment, I'd say, in Turkey.
Okay. But now you find yourself, you're in the position of being a freelancer, but working for foreign outlets from a base inside Turkey. How does that change the rules of the game? Do you come under more or less pressure working for an outlet such as Deutsche Welle than you would working for CNN Türk?
So after I was fired from CNN Türk, what they did is they basically treated me like I don't exist. Like basically you call politicians to get some insight. The AK Party politicians or MHP politicians or their advisors, you know, they don't answer back. They don't give you information. They don't invite you to any of the, you know, press events, none basically. So they pretended I don't exist. But then, I mean, there are a lot of stories that you can do without, you know, the people in power. So you can, you know, cover other issues. So this is what I basically did. And whenever I called opposition figures for interviews, I mean, they never declined. They always talked, but never from the government. So this is what they've been doing. And I kind of persisted. I mean, I continued doing what I've been doing, you know, as good as I can do. And also, I think working for Deutsche Welle is kind of an advantage because it's a German outlet and it's an international outlet with good credentials and this and that. You know, it has an image in Turkey. So it helped me also. Now it's interesting. Sometimes I do a story and they call me back from ministries to give me insight, and some, you know, AK Party politicians started contacting me and this and that. So it's interesting, you know.
Okay, so access is cut off. I mean, that game is played with journalists in many countries, right? You know,
Yeah.
I've had experience of friends who've suffered being put into the freezer in Washington, for example. But has there ever been a case, as it were, of pressure going on those at Deutsche Welle to say, look, you can't run this report, you need to keep an eye on her, or otherwise there'll be some unspecified form of, let's say, kickback against Deutsche Welle for allowing you to report freely?
There is a so-called think tank in Turkey, SETA. That's like a pro-government think tank type of thing. And they did like a big report on foreign press in Turkey. And they basically finger pointed Deutsche Welle Türkçe, BBC Türkçe, and this and that. And they portrayed these international media outlets as being, you know, mercenaries against Turkey that are reporting against Turkey, whatnot, you know, that type, you know. It's like a report that you'd see in the Islamic Republic of Iran, probably, you know, you saw many of them too back in Iran. So in that tone, you know, in that tone. That's what they did. I mean, other than that, basically, I mean, Deutsche Welle wouldn't care what they like. Why would they care? Like somebody would call Deutsche Welle. Who are they going to call even? Like are they going to call Germany and say, don't report this? No, nobody would listen to that basically. So, and one thing, I mean, if you have a TV channel, actually you're under scrutiny because you get under this High Commission of Radio and TV, basically, you know, system. But if you are an internet site, you kind of have a more free hand. And the reason for that is, I believe, because most of AK Party constituents still get their information mainly from TV channels. So for AK Party, what's being reported on TV is massively important. But most of their constituents don't get on the internet. I mean, if they do, they're like on Facebook, right? They don't go to the, you know, news sites and search, and none of them would click on Deutsche Welle Türkçe because they don't even know what that is. So in that sense, AK Party doesn't really care, you know, what other, you know, because there are people who are voting for CHP, HDP, this and that. They would never vote for AK Party. So the AK Party does not care about them. AK Party cares about it's like holding its constituents together. So, you know, if you're a website, if you're on YouTube, for now, you have a little bit of more of a free hand.
So in other words, they're protecting the base. That seems to be the starting point for AKP.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and quite often, you know, you'll have the shorthand when the West notices Turkey, which is Turkey is the largest jailer of journalists on a per capita basis in the world, which is a serious issue. But I want to get behind that. I noticed, for example, at the end of December that you had the editorial director and the news director of, I think, ODA TV, ODA TV. They're facing a total of 158 years in prison. And my question really is what's the line that you cross as a journalist? What is it that actually means authorities might think this journalist needs now to go to prison? Is it offense to the president? Is it covering a particular issue? Is it reporting something on the economy? In other words, what's the no-go area that could get a journalist detained in Turkey?
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, if you dig the president's finances, that's kind of dangerous. If you dig a lot about his son-in-law, Berat Albayrak, might be a little dangerous. These days, touching Mr. Bahçeli, can be there. But, these things change on even sometimes a weekly basis. Like sometimes some people are like, no, go, don't touch them. But like 2 weeks later, nobody cares. So it really always changes. So what you have to do is you have to have a strong nose and you have to sniff, the environment, what to do, what not to do, basically. But I mean, you cannot do journalism like that, can you? I mean, you see a story and you report about it in your own way. You either do a video or you write about it, you share it on social media. So basically, anything can happen anytime. That's the fact of being a journalist.
So I noticed today there's a story about anecdotal culture. Forgive my Alabama translation of that. And so there's a cultural initiative and the government's trying to put pressure on it. But yet there is a Turkish outlet which is able to report about this by going to an opposition party member. So there is some space still for negotiation regarding these cultural spaces, if not quite, and I guess political spaces in a way. There is that room for maneuver, right? It's not completely shut down. There
is. I mean, you cannot, compare to China or Iran in that sense. There is some opposition media or free media in a sense, but as I said, they're like more concerned about TV news stories basically. But we have these strong opposition TV channels also, like Halk TV and this, that, and they're doing some things, but they're rather more like they're mouthpieces of CHP, I'd say, in a sense, right? You cannot criticize opposition party there, for example. They have their own red lines, but we have a lot of news websites. And we have like a lot of YouTubers are emerging, they're reporting on news and this and that. So that's what we have. That's the space we have, basically, freer, like I'd say, internet.
So, I mean, because in the past there have been blocks on YouTube, but I assume we're talking now that
there have.
But YouTube is now generally available, and Twitter.
It is because the government also, like pro-party people, are using YouTube very effectively. Also, YouTube like it leads you in algorithms. So you watch me, then it would show you someone similar to me, right? Or if I watch a pro-government pundit, then it leads me to. So I think now that they feel safer with YouTube because their constituents stay in the algorithm in a sense.
That leads me then back to you, which is you've got a very prominent social media profile, a very prominent reach for that. How do you use social media? Is it a matter that you're thinking about your persona, or are you trying to get conversations and dialogue through social media? What are your tactics for using a Twitter or a YouTube now? Yeah,
I think on Twitter, having a dialogue in Turkey is kind of impossible because like in Russia, the government has these like pro-government trolls. And they sometimes have these systematic attacks and this and that. So basically, when you write something, I mean, when I write something, usually I'm under systematic attack, but that's a part of it. So I use this Twitter algorithm. So I use the algorithm in the sense that I don't see those attacks because there's no point. They're not real, viewer or reader critics. So that's what I do. But on YouTube, I do daily videos about what happened today, mainly about the news and a little bit of analysis. People seem to like it, and I usually interact better on YouTube. During the live, I can see comments and I answer them, Also after, I always check the comments I get on my videos. And I really actually, some people want me to cover some stories. I get like basically ideas about that. Some people give me information also. And some people basically criticize in a positive or a negative way. So I think YouTube is an easier medium to communicate with people.
And how do you both as a journalist in that social media space, deal with what comes with the territory. You will get the trolls, you will get the bots who are coming after you. How do you stay sane in the middle of all of that?
I don't know. I learned how to do that because, I mean, this is the new world. This is 2021. This is how the communications is going to be from now on. You know, it'll never go back. We'll never go back to these good old days where you had the TV and you are on TV and doing your own stuff, and there's a distance between you and your viewers. This will never happen again. You know, now this world is like this, and you have, if you want to do your job, you know, as a journalist, and if you're going to keep reporting for the next decade, you have to get used to it, basically. If you cannot get used to it, don't do this job. That's what I always say.
It's just that's not what they initially trained us for when I went to journalism school. I was like, who, what, where, when. It wasn't like, you know, how many trolls are going to be there in a day for you. Okay.
How about in the US? Like, for example, you know, do you have these Trumpist trolls and this and that attacking journalists?
I got blocked by my mother on Facebook. What are you talking about? You know, it's interesting because I function in a UK media system, as viewers of World Unfiltered will know, and as well as being an academic. So I've navigated that, but I started as a journalist in the States in the 80s. So just for a local newspaper. And what I find now compared to when I trained back then is not that the basic rules aren't there. It's like we still look for multiple sources. We still try to get behind the headline to dig, but the speed and the scope of what we're navigating is so intense.
Yeah.
That there's that feeling of that you like, I always say, look, how do you maintain control? And that's always that question of just stepping back, as it were, from it.
No, you're totally right. I mean, it's like a huge space right now. For example, now we have this Clubhouse. Do you know Clubhouse?
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Yeah, because I mean, I see most of my American colleagues, they like, you know, they don't like, they're like Clubhouse, it's irrelevant. But in Turkey, it's like a huge new medium for journalism, in a sense, unfortunately, because what happens is every night there are these rooms and all the politicians go to these rooms. Like you see like AK Party politicians and then CHP politicians in opposition polls end up in the same room and they start discussing something. And it's like, you know, if you're not, I mean, you miss a story, basically, you know? So not to miss that, I'm like every night and I'm like, okay, let me check Clubhouse. But then I'm realizing I don't have a life. Seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
All day long, I'm on Twitter, you know, trying to see what's happening, who's saying what. And especially Turkish politicians, they're talking all the time on Twitter, like, you know, Donald Trump used to do, basically. You know, they're like, they're commenting, they're like saying this, saying that. Even, you know, when AK Party's, I mean, Erdogan's son-in-law, when he resigned, he published this resignation on Instagram. Can you imagine? So basically, I'm on social media all the time. And now at night, I'm like on Clubhouse. And these Turkish politicians, I don't know, are they working or like how long do they sleep in the mornings? Because at night, they speak until 2 in the morning, until, you know, 3 in the morning. What the hell? And if I'm not there, I'm missing a story. So, you know, it's like now I'm like a mad person, you know, working 24/7, basically. You know, that's one downside. Do you guys have the same?
Well, I mean, I have always been, you know, my website, EA Worldview, could not have existed had it not been for social media. We couldn't have gathered news from the ground, right? But now what you're talking about, it's not news from the ground. It's news from all up in the air. So when they go into Clubhouse, is it a version of what we used to call the Westminster lobby? In other words, journalists would be gathered, they would talk at you and give you like the stories you should print. Or when they go into Clubhouse, are they actually speaking, quote, honestly, that they actually are trying to navigate and negotiate and doing it on air, so to speak?
Actually, that's pretty interesting because I think Clubhouse just gives you this idea of being face-to-face, because on Twitter, you just write something, post it, whatever, you know, you don't get a reaction or, you know, it's like, okay, on Clubhouse, you don't see other people, but like, it's like you're face-to-face. So for example, the other day, there were AK Party politicians discussing their new Istanbul, chair of Istanbul, right? So it was, and there were like these AK Party pundits and this, all of a sudden, this CHP main opposition parties, is the head of Istanbul, Canan Kaftancıoğlu, she's a very influential politician here. she jumped into this role, and it was like, wow, she's among all these AK Party people. What is she going to say? And then a dialogue started. They started kind of criticizing Canan Kaftancıoğlu. She answered. This said that. So it's like in a sense, it's like you went to an event, and you have these basically rooms in events where people discuss something, and like you're in it, just like basically it's just like that. So it's not like they tell you what to report or what to say or something. But then it's really interesting. Or sometimes some AK Party pundits come across with some, I don't know, like independent journalists, and kind of a discussion starts. But what's amazing in Clubhouse, people are usually really, how shall I say, not rude, but they're really nice to each other. You don't see like the language you see on Twitter. People are really nice, understanding, and kind of they're trying to empathize with each other and try to understand each other. And they try to answer sincerely. That's the sense that I get.
So we've got our new space that we have to try to negotiate. This is really interesting. When you're working then and trying to keep control of all of this, are you working from the standpoint that you think certain stories are going to be the big stories for 2021, whether it's the state of the Turkish economy and the currency, the lira, whether it's the state of AKP and the changes in personnel, such as President Erdogan's son-in-law, now former finance minister? Are you thinking about, Turkey's, as it were, maneuvering in the Middle East, including in Syria? Do you sort of have stories, or are you just going in with blank and what pops up?
I joined a little seminar in BBC, it's like a seminar for like a week or something about journalism. And basically BBC guys there was a journalist from Turkey and Israel and, some Palestine. So the BBC guy asked, so, what are your criteria for having like a breaking news? And we were like, Israeli journalists, and we're like, what do you mean? They're like, we have these 10 points. No. If something is no, then you can start your live as like a breaking news. And we looked at each other with Israeli journalists and said, dude, if something is breaking news, you just sense it, right? You don't need these. No. You don't need these bullet points. You see it. And BBC guys were really confused. Like, what do you mean? You don't have rules? No, you sense it. You see it. I mean, basically, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but you see something and you sense, you're like, oh God, that's gonna be big, right? You sense it. So that's what I do. It's really hard to, we Turks, I mean, it's really hard for us to put everything in a scheme.
You can't go into boxes. All right, then. What do you sense? What do you sense will be the big story? Will be the big story in Turkey this year?
In 2000, oh my God, there'll be a lot. I mean, AK Party is trying to change this election law. They're saying you'll not have early elections, but then why are they trying to change election law? And our pro-AK Party journalists are reporting on that every day. So maybe we might expect an election, not in 2021, but maybe 2022. One other big story will be on economy, because Turkish economy is really in shambles. Let me tell you, people are struggling here, really struggling. And if Mr. Biden comes up with a new bunch of sanctions, I'd say Turkey would be finished, in that sense. It'll be really hard. So I'm sensing economy is going to be the main thing here.
So trying to read that, how much can, through early elections, through tweaks to the Constitution, how much can President Erdogan and the ruling party insulate themselves economic effects from economic downturn?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good question. I don't know. We'll all watch and see, because I mean, Mr. Erdogan has been, taking these, what do you call this? Taking rabbits out of the hat. He's that type. And he's kind of used to that. He's like, I'll have a last minute miracle. But will he be able to do the same? I don't know. I mean, by the way, I mean, what do you think? Because, Turkey-America relations, I mean, Turkey is not in the top of the agenda for the Biden administration, apparently. But mending relations with Biden seems to be really important for Erdogan. What do you think? What do you foresee about that?
See, I think, and again, if we read this out in the system, the American system isn't just Biden. The American system is also Congress. And what we might have, I think it's quite clear that President Erdogan, including in his speech just a few days ago, was signaling to the Biden administration, let's be friends. Let's not let the Kurdish issue get between us. Let's not have these sanctions get in the way. Let's not let the Russians get in the way. But the people who propelled the sanctions against Turkey in large part were legislators. They weren't in the executive. Now, I don't know how much the ruling party, the AK party, and Erdogan are trying to lobby the legislators in Washington. But the problem for me is, and I'll put this back to you in terms of how we try to cope with this, it's almost like things are a kaleidoscope. So you can turn one piece and everything else moves. We have sanctions. We have got Turkey's maneuvers with the Russians, including the S-400 military system. We have got the Kurdish issue, both inside Turkey and in northern Iraq and in Syria. And we also have the question of Iran, which will be the priority position for the Americans, and where Turkey may have to maneuver that, especially because they've been under scrutiny for breaking sanctions on Iran in the past. Mm-hmm. So with that many issues in play, I'm not sure anyone gets control, as it were, of Turkish-US relations in the near future.
You're totally right. There are a lot of, Turkey says, let's compartmentalize the relations and let's work on the things which we can work on. That's what, Turkish officials, in a sense, say. But is that going to be possible? I don't think, because Biden administration, they're like, is it like back to idealism, right? In a sense. So yeah, it's going to be harder for Mr. Erdogan, I suppose. But we'll see. That's politics. You never know, right?
I think the Biden administration are pragmatists first and foremost. And we've discussed this with, for example, Professor Solyozol, right, who walked us through it. The question I have coming from the Turkish side, and you're trying to read this day to day, is it was once said of President Putin that he's a master tactician, but he's not a strategist. And I've always wondered about President Erdogan, who I think has a bit of an admiration for President Putin, whether President Erdogan is also a master tactician, but not necessarily a strategist when it comes to not only dealing with the Americans, but also maneuvering vis-a-vis the Europeans, vis-a-vis the Russians, and vis-a-vis the Gulf states as well. True.
You're totally right, I'd say. They have these daily outbursts. You know what I think? We Turkish public, we act like adolescents. We never act like adults. For example, something happens in Turkey, people are extremely happy, right? Or extremely sad. Like, you don't have this like sit and have a rational talk, think rational. We don't have it in Turkey. So we're always like extremes, either so happy or either so sad. So this is also like Erdogan politics is like that too. One day they're like extremely this, and the other day they're extremely that. And they have been able to juggle it, basically. But after that, it has a basically ending point, I'd say.
What's the end point? Do we know?
Well, what's the end? The elections, of course, in Turkey. There's no other way. The elections. Yeah.
All right. So the question is whether the elections come first or the economic collapse comes first. It's almost for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me ask you one final question. This has been so great. On the one hand, you portrayed this scenario where we do feel buffeted. We do feel like, we're caught up in emotions. Yet on the other hand, on YouTube and in your work, you really have sort of emphasized what I think of as media literacy for people to try to understand what is going on. How much possibility is there in this changing media world that we face that you think that many people will become media literate, that they'll be able to navigate the messages, navigate between the lines of the messages, and feel like they have some type of control as to what's going on?
From my point of view, people seem more and more confused. That's what I do. I have also podcast, show. What I do in my podcast is like, I take one topic and I basically put it in order. Like, I was like, how did it start? Why did it start? What happened? Who said what? And that's why it happened, right? Simple, for like say a half an hour thing. Because then as I started doing this podcast, I realized, a lot of things are happening, a lot, and back in the old days, probably, I mean, politicians would just talk. Yeah, imagine like back in 1990s, even politicians would talk maybe once a week somewhere, right? And TVs would report about it like really short, and that's it. Now, like everybody's talking, a lot of things are happening all over the place, and it's kind of impossible to follow. I mean, I'm following because that's my job. But if I was a regular person working in a bank, say, I cannot sit in front of the computer and basically follow who said what and what, like that. I mean, that actually, I think in this era, journalism is needed more than ever. Because they're like, everybody's talking through Twitter, and it's like, yes, but somebody has to, gather these messages, put them in a form, and then convey it to people. Otherwise, people are even more confused. How are they going to follow all this?
That's a really good point to stop for the moment on, that somehow maybe we find a space where we can bring everything together. Let me thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me for this conversation.
Nevşin, Mengü, I hope that this is not the only conversation we have. I would like to cross
inshallah.
paths. Inshallah, indeed. But for now, thank you for helping guide us through these uncertain waters. Let me thank the Deep Dive Politics team as well for holding it together between us while we're on air. And most of all, let me thank you, viewers, as you try to establish a big control as well, whether it be of your daily lives, whether it be of the issues in your communities or around the world. We can be followed on Twitter at dive_politics. On Facebook, it's Deep Dive Politics. We're not yet on Clubhouse, give us time. But in addition to all of our World Unfiltered videos on YouTube, you can get the podcast version on Spotify. For now, however, let me just say, stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. I'm Scott Lucas.
I'm Nevşin Mengü.
And this has been World Unfiltered.